We'll wait until all the attendees are in the room. Welcome, everyone. Let's just give it just about 30 seconds to have everyone in the room. Well, thank you so much for coming today. We're very excited. Well, I am very excited for this presentation. Anonymity sampling in the current state of our world and can be applied to so many contexts. And learning from our two presenters here today, Ammar and Pooyan. This is something that I think we're all curious about. And I actually, even though we're talking about authoritarian context today, I think, this type of sampling can be thought of in non-authoritarian contexts too. It could be applied in many contexts. And these are strategies and just a new way of thinking about how to do sampling in our new environments. So we're really lucky today to have this deep dive into this topic. So today, our two guests will present to us. We have about 1 hour, I believe, dedicated to this, and we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes maybe for questions and see how many we can get through. But I will turn it over to our guest now without further ado. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today and sharing your expertise in this area. I will turn my video off.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for from WAPOR to provide this opportunity for us. I'm Ammar Maleki. I'm Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics at Tilburg University and the Director and Founder of GAMAN, the group for analyzing and measuring attitudes in Iran. Today, we want to talk about anonymity sampling or anonymity surveying because we think that there is some issues, specifically in authoritarian context, that maybe we need to consider or reconsider our methodology. So the first part, I talk about the methodology and some examples, and in the next part, Pooyan, Dr. Tamimi Arab, my colleague, will talk more about examples, specifically on the religiosity in Iran. So if you just be curious about religiosity in Iran, maybe you search and you can see this Wikipedia page maybe, and then you can see a very big green circle showing that Iranian, about 98% or 99% of Iranians, as Pew also mentioned, 99.5% of Iranians are Muslim. And so this is what we can see over past years, many years. In fact, those researchers who try to use methods that we know as established methods, rigorous methods, using phone or face-to-face sampling, those methods that you are familiar with, CATI, CAPI, CAVI, RDD, and so they came to these numbers. But the question is that to what extent these numbers are valid. This is part that Pooyan will talk more about that. Another question regarding the case of Iran is that to what extent people like the current Islamic regime in Iran. It's a kind of theocratic system, and we know that many surveys, for instance, Pew years ago asked people to what extent the things that religious figures should run the country, and you can see also World Value Survey asked about the having a system governed by religious law, to what extent it's good, and we can see about 70 to 78% mention that it's a good way to have this kind of things. But again, this is the kind of things that, okay, to what extent these numbers can show the reality of Iran. And if these numbers are true, the problem is that why we can see waves of protest, waves of, in fact, in all that sides of the country. It's a kind of nationwide protest over a few years, at least over past 7 years. And so the question is that if people are happy with all of these things, why it cannot, why all those surveys, conventional surveys, could not predict, could not explain what we saw in the protest against the whole, in fact, Islamic system in Iran. So the issue, as many of you know, about the kind of sensitive questions and the concept of preference falsification, that people may falsify their real opinions. And so we know in the literature we have the fear of the state bias, or sometimes they call it autocratic bias. And this is beyond social desirability bias, that you try not to answer, or you say something that maybe seems good, but this is something about the kind of misrepresenting yourself. And this is the concept of preference falsification. When deliberately misrepresenting one's real opinions because of the social and political pressure. So in that way, we have some private truths and many public lies. And that's problematic if you want to know real opinions and you want to consider your policy, that kind of understanding a society. And the problem is that also in the literature, we know that some people, some researchers, scholars think that maybe item non-response or don't know answers can say something about the hidden dissent. But that's also not the case. The very recent study also showed that the number of don't know or item non-response cannot show the kind of the level of the dissatisfaction with the regime related questions. And so we know also there are many also list experiments in authoritarian context. Some of them show also up to 50% of discrepancies between what people answer in direct question and indirect question. So we know that the issue of preference falsification is very serious in authoritarian context. And the problem is that because the conventional surveys, phone surveys, email surveys, or face-to-face surveys sometimes produce a specific number, and authoritarian regimes sometimes just let you do these kind of surveys because there is some inflated numbers, and they can say that these inflated numbers is real opinions of people. In fact, they use it as a kind of propaganda tools for selling, in fact, those numbers that, you can see, the kind of our popularity is high. And that's another issue that we don't like as the researchers to understand the reality of society. On the other hand, we know that online surveys decrease this problem of self-censorship because in a kind of with a promise of anonymity, in fact, increase self-disclosure. So given all these things, we think that, okay, maybe online surveys can have something more than what we heard over past years. And the problem, but is that with online surveys, we know that the issue of representativeness, all these sampling bias, we cannot have probability sampling, but by online surveys, and that's true. But the main issue here is the kind of balancing between validity and representativeness. And we know that when people don't say what they really think, then we have measurement error that can be even worse than sampling error. And that's the exact issues that we have in authoritarian context, because we have hard to reveal, as we name it, populations. They don't want to say what they think. And in that way, it's very important to consider anonymity. And anonymity is something very important. And that's why we try to highlight anonymity in the label of our method. The problem is that in the literature, and many scholars consider confidentiality as the same as anonymity. And that's completely misleading, because if you say that, okay, we don't share your number, we don't share your address, we don't share your email with anyone, and this is confidential, and you are a big company like World Value Survey or Gallup, in authoritarian context, people think that if you have my number, then the government can access it if they want. It's something that confidentiality doesn't mean in a way that you have in a free society, in the kind of, that based on the rule of law. So in that way, anonymity is something different. And that's very important, how we can somehow ensure anonymity. And on the other hand, we know that if we have non-probabilities samples and we have sampling bias, we can do something for that using weighting, matching, those balancing method to adjust and to extract a kind of representative sample. But the problem is that when we have measurement error and the measurement is very high, then we cannot really fix it. And that's the problem that maybe we should think how maybe we use online surveys, but in a way that we can also extract a representative sample, then maybe we can really measure what people think in those societies for sensitive questions. That's why our hypothesis is that anonymity sampling would yield more valid results than non-anonymous probability sampling. And that's something we want to show you the results and what we did. But anonymity sampling, if we want to define the features of anonymity sampling, specifically, again, I want to emphasize that in authoritarian context, confidentiality is perceived as accessibility. So in that way, it's very important to consider anonymity, and anonymity means no identifying and identifiable footprint. So no phone number, address, or email or IP should be somehow collected or got from a respondent. And perceived anonymity is also dependent on where you get the survey, from where you get the survey. It's something very important. You can give the survey from a kind of trusted networks, trusted platforms. And that's why it's very important. In that way, people accept to answer to the survey questions. In that way, so having no interviewer is very important. So self-administration is essential in this method. And so in that way, if we have online surveys, so it should be distributed via social media or VPN platform in which there is no specific, the IP address or a kind of, let's say, identifiable address is received from the respondents. So in that way, it's very important that you use this method in a country with high internet penetration, using high use of VPNs and social media. And also, for getting finally a kind of representative sample, it's very important to have large and diverse samples. So it doesn't work if you have just 1,000 or 2,000 samples using online survey, and then we know that it's not really possible to get a kind of representative sample for that. That's why it's very important to have a very large sample size using several, in fact, let's say seeds or the way to get a large sample. And also, for getting large sample, it's also very important to have short and simple questionnaire. So it should not be taken more than 5 or 10 to 10 minutes, because otherwise you cannot have a really large sample size. These are some features, or maybe main features, of anonymity sampling. And how we do that then in practice, we consider two modes of anonymity sampling so far we could examine in GAMON. One of them is called multiple chain referral sampling. It is something that the name says, something that we use a kind of referral sampling, but it is a lot of different chains of that. And so it's not just a kind of convenient sampling that you have one, for instance, survey on a specific website or somewhere, and then you wait to receive that. So popular social media platforms are very important. And as I explained for you, we use hundreds of, for instance, pages or channels to distribute data. We know that it is anonymous in that way, but it is for sure non-probability sampling. The other method that we use is, we call it VPN sampling, in which we use popular nationwide VPN providers. And that's very interesting because when you have access to such a kind of a VPN platform, then it can also somehow estimate semi-random sampling, still anonymous and so. And in the context of Iran that we, in fact, examined and did our surveys, it's important to know these features, specifically about the online use of the internet use. As you can see, the 90% internet penetration we have Iran among literate population, and we know that 90% of Iranians are literate. 90% of adults own a mobile phone. This is the very recent numbers according to the International Communication Center or some official numbers. 85% of Iranians use at least one of the major social media: WhatsApp, Instagram, Telegram, Twitter, or so. And so in that way, on the other hand, all major social media platforms are filtered in Iran. So it's a kind of interesting paradox, all of them, YouTube, Instagram, Telegram, are filtered. So that's why 80% of internet users in Iran according again to the parliament reports, rely on using VPNs or anti-filtering tool. So in that way, it seems that social media and VPN, we can reach the majority of the population. You know that it's about 80 to 90% of people can be accessed. So multiple chain referral sampling, how it works. You know that we start to put the kind of survey link to Instagram channel pages or Telegram channels, and some people in in that community, because they have trust to that in fact channel or pages, they start to answer. And as you can see, we expect, as also these graphics show, for sure we have bias sampling. We have maybe from one of those seeds we receive people who are older. We maybe receive some just sample from people living in a specific rural area or a province. But when we have hundreds of in fact these seeds, at the end of the day, we have a very large sample. When we put all these samples together, then we can extract a kind of representative sample out of it. This is what we use for multiple chain referral sampling. Yes, illiterate people we cannot cover. This is something that we know that it is the kind of non-coverage. But given that 90% of population are literate, then maybe it's not a kind of big issue. Another method, VPN sampling, we use Siphon. And Siphon is a popular free anti-filter VPN used in China, Russia, Iran. And in Iran, we know that about 4 to 7 million daily unique users they have. And this is something that the numbers that are publicly available, we can also track it. And they don't collect personally identified information, no IP collected. They just use as aggregated to recognize that the connection for the place of connection, and they can also see which country is connected. So when people use their app or on their desktops to connect to Siphon, then they somehow can bypass blocked channels and connect it to internet, and then they can there is a kind of landing page for that VPN, and then they can see our survey in fact promotion, and when they click to start the survey, then in fact they can answer that. And for the very recent survey that we did in June last year, in survey they sent to 22 million in fact people inside Iran. 16 million of people in fact viewed that promotion, and 480K people in fact clicked on that, and then 79,000 people answered completely to surveys. So given that, you can see that how it's a kind of very large number of in fact samples we could have. We have 60% of let's say response rate for mobile users and 33% for desktop users, and it's a really large numbers, as you know. So in practice, this is what we do as a kind of what we did in practice in Iran for anonymity sampling. We did in Gaman. We did several surveys starting from 2019 till now, and the target populations are literate over literate adults, and so we know that they are about 90% of the whole population. And we use several surveys using multiple chain referral sampling in 2021, 2022, and also the last 2 years we used also VPN sampling, and for some of these surveys also we used both of them. Yes, we combined in fact using social media and also using VPN platforms. And as you can see, the number of samples are really large. It's started from 16,000 to 158,000 samples, and the most recent survey that we did regarding the snap presidential election in Iran last year in June 2024, we had the 77,000 in fact correct sample at the end, and I will show some results based on that survey later. So when we have this sample size, we know that it is not representative, so it's we should do some weighting and balancing and or matching to extract a representative sample. We use raking method based on 5 demographic and also sometimes a political variable to in fact weight this sample and extract the representative sample at the end. And for instance, as I said, that for the recent survey, the effective sample size after weighting was about 200,000, and you know that it's a really a large number for that. So, and for benchmarks and comparisons, we use the labor force survey in Iran that they do it quarterly, And also there are some other phone surveys or face-to-face surveys we used for comparing with them, including word value surveys, sometimes Gallup and other surveys that we know that we can compare for non-sensitive questions, because we consider that for sensitive questions we cannot rely on their numbers, but for non-sensitive questions there should be no problem. And that's why when we extract representative sample, we check with non-sensitive external benchmarks. For instance, employment rate, as you can see for the very recent survey, after waiting, we have a good, in fact, match between employment rates in the urban area, rural area with the recent data. Also, we check, for instance, for the income level, household income level, and we see that after waiting, again, we have a very good match, including all low income, middle income, and high income population in our sample. Also, we check with the languages speak at home. It's also interesting to see that we have the final representative sample can show that we have all, in fact, groups of people speaking different languages at home. And also it's very good match with the numbers from the in fact, benchmarks. And also for the healthcare insurance, this is something that not like other countries in Iran, you cannot select your health insurance company. Normally, you have a specific health insurance company based on your your job or your type of work. And we use the phone survey recently done in Iran, and then we compare our final sample to see that do we have the same, in fact, results or not. And as you can see, it's a very good match again about the health insurance. So and also we checked with the word value survey with the benchmark for the importance in life. We know that importance of family, importance of friend, and importance of work should be non-sensitive questions, and that's why also you can see our numbers are completely matched with the results from word value survey. But for the importance of religion, we consider that it's not a kind of non-sensitive. It's a very sensitive question. And that's why when you compare the results of Gammon survey and word value survey, we see about 50% differences that Pooyan will explain more later. But the results of the very recent survey, maybe that's also to see that how VPN sampling, how anonymity sampling worked in practice. We did a survey a week before the snap presidential election in Iran last year, and we had the estimation that 65% of people mentioned that they don't want to vote in the election. And we know that in authoritarian countries, when you have elections, sometimes turnout is more important than the who will be the winner, because people wants to boycott to show their protest, and the regime wants to show that no majority of people participated, and that's why very important to measure the turnout. And this is the results of one face-to-face survey, one phone survey, and also our results using VPN sampling. And as you can see, face-to-face survey predicted that 51% will vote. Phone surveys had the same, in fact, prediction. Official figures, that's also, I should mention that we cannot rely on official figures in Iran, because we know that sometimes they inflated or manipulate numbers. But anyway, official figures was 11% less than what phone surveys and face-to-face predicted. But we in Gammon, with the VPN sampling, we had 35%. So it is also the most the closer to the even official figures. And for us, the question is that, okay, then what those conventional surveys, face-to-face surveys and phone surveys measured? We have always the kind of hypothesis that those who can say what they really think are those who are not against the regime. And they call themselves either reformist or principalist in Iran or conservatives in Iran. And then when we just control for that subsample in Gammon survey, then we saw that, okay, we have also very close results with the conventional surveys. And that's also very interesting, as we think that the issue of preference falsification here is also show itself in another phase. So another thing that I would like to share with you is about the ruling system. This is the question that word value survey asked about the which ruling system do you think is good or very good or bad or very bad. For instance, having a democratic political system, having the army rule, and having a system governed by religious law. We have the assumption that for non-sensitive questions, we should have no problem. World Value Survey showed that in Iran, 97% say that having a democratic political system is good. And this is non-sensitive question. Maybe you think that Iran is a kind of authoritarian country, so democracy should be a kind of taboo or not. But this is not the case, because the issue is that Iranian regime consider itself as a real democracy. And this is the tweet by the supreme leader of Iran. They mentioned that the real democracy is what we are. And so the Western democracies are not real. And so in that way, it is not sensitive question. That's why World Value Survey and VPN sampling have the same results. For having the army rule, we consider is a kind of sensitive question, because we know that in Iran is in practice a kind of army rule we have, not officially, but IRGC in Iran is very strong. So in World Value Survey, about 43% mentioned that having the army rule is good, but in Gaman survey, 25% less than that we see. Just 80% say that it's good or very good. And again, another question, which we consider a very sensitive question, is asking about the system governed by religious law. This is what, in fact, we have in practice. Having a theocratic system is good or not. World Value Survey measured that 79% thinks it's good. Gammon surveys showed that it is 28%, 50 percentage differences, and it's really too much. Again, when we control just for those subsample who supporting the regime, and then again, we see that we have the same results for non-sensitive question, not strange. For the having the army rule, again, we see that we have very similar results for those subsample, and also for the having theocratic regime. When we control just for the subsample of those who are not against the regime, we have the same results with the face-to-face sampling. So, but the question for you may be that, okay, 50 percentage discrepancy is really strange. Maybe you cannot believe that. And is it something that we can, it's real or not? That's something that we ask people. We ask those who participated in online survey, in VPN sampling, that you participated anonymously. But imagine that you participate in a kind of phone survey, and you were asked the same questions. Do you give the same answers over the phone? And you can see that we asked it in two different surveys. Just about 50% of respondents mentioned that yes, we say the same answer. So it shows that we can have discrepancy up to 50 percentage, depending on the sensitivity of the question. And that's why when you have very sensitive question, you can see that we have about 50 percentage differences, but maybe for less sensitive question, we have less than that. So some insights to finish it at 25 minutes that I mentioned. We want to consider that people in authoritarian context, just also maybe in free societies, sometimes for sensitive questions, misreport their views on sensitive topics. So the question how we can measure real public opinion in such societies. We think anonymity sampling can offer promising alternative by ensuring respondents' anonymity. It's very important. And using utilizing widely used social media and VPN platforms, and also reaching diverse demographics and political groups through larger samples. In that way, we can maybe measure something that is not really easy to do it with the conventional methods. And so we can see that conventional methods maybe reflect the views of regime supporters. And if you have many people who are against that regime, then you completely measure something differently. In that way, if we have, and we can see that fear of the state bias reach up to 50 percentage points, then we think alternative sampling method become essential. And so, given some other findings regarding religiosity in Iran, I would like to ask my colleague to continue.
Thank you, Ammar. I will now share my screen. So
to stop it, and then you can share, I think, or if you
I
can.
sent a request so that I can, I got it, yes.
Okay, so you can share?
Yes, let me
Perfect.
select it. You can see it, right?
I think now you should.
Okay. All right. So how to measure?
Sorry, Pooyan, I think you didn't share it still. I cannot see. Others can see?
I think Alice just or someone
Yeah,
you can
I can see the slides.
Yeah.
Okay,
good.
that's okay.
All right. So how to measure secularization in a theocracy? As Ammar already indicated, the World Value Survey conducted the last national on-site survey in 2020. actually during Corona. And based on the unannounced face-to-face interviews at respondents' homes, it was found that 97% identified as Muslims. Now, according to these results, there are no Jews, Baha'i, atheists in Iran. There are no others who prefer fuzzier labels like spiritual. Only one lone Jehovah's Witness, that's in other Christian, you see that, dared to, express himself, and a few dozen of the 1,499 respondents who said they belonged to no denomination. Moreover, as Ammar just showed, the majority, according to these results, views a political system governed by religious law as very good or fairly good. Now, if we were to accept these results fundamentally in terms of identification and support for the political system, it would mean that little has changed since the 1979 Islamic Revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, let me be clear. A near 100% identification of the population as Muslims based on unannounced house visits in a brutal theocracy that criminalizes non-religiosity does not reflect people's real views of themselves. The regime considers atheism and critique of religion as heresy and conversion from Islam to another religion as a severe crime for which judges can and have ordered capital punishment. So I've often, being in the humanities, I've often wondered, how is it possible that intelligent researchers might believe these Kafkaesque results, according to which the Iranian identification with Islam is so absolute that there's almost no space left for growth? Can a 21st century society truly be this homogeneous? And let's ignore the fact that it was carried out by our research, formerly known as Russia Research, with the help of a company based in Tehran, which has had as its clients such institutions as the Foundation for the Preservation and Publication of Sacred Defense Works and Values, the Ministry of the Interior, and the Presidency of the Islamic Republic. Now, I'm not saying they manipulated the outcomes. They don't need to, as Ammar already explained. The survey mode itself is sufficient to be affected by the fear of the state. So I believe there are two main reasons for this uncritical stance. The first is ignoring qualitative research and ignoring the authoritarian and theocratic context when evaluating survey methods. The second is that the Islamic Revolution in Iran has been an important event for sociologists who since the 1980s and 1990s criticized the secularization thesis. According to the secularization thesis, modernization does not only separate religious and diverse institutions such as schools, hospitals, the army, and government, it also leads to a decline of traditional majority religions and their authority. Critiques of the secularization thesis have had the perverse effect that Muslims became viewed as unchangeably religious. And so Iran's Islamic Revolution served as one of the main counterexamples to secularization narratives. And despite repeated criticism that things in Iran are much more complicated, this view persists in major publications, even of those who are sympathetic towards the secularization theory. For example, Habermas, in his book, Also a History of Philosophy, published in German in 2019 and English 2023, names Iran for arguing that, quote, we cannot rule out the historical possibility of a reversal of the process of secularization, end quote. So according to Habermas, Iran, the way that he cites Iran, shows the reversal of secularization. New analyses by the World Value Survey's late founder, Engelhardt, however, found that 4 decades of survey research does reveal global patterns of secularization. Even the United States, long said to be exceptionally religious, is understood by institutes such as the Pew Research Center to be undergoing secularization according to metrics such as a decline in the belief in God, self-identification with any religion, formal membership of a religious group, and the increasing likelihood of remaining or becoming unaffiliated later in life. Yet, Engelhardt's secularization theory contradicts data he analyzed for comparison with Middle Eastern countries. And he himself was puzzled. For example, Iran's fertility rate has been unprecedentedly low in the first quarter of the 21st century, with a fertility rate of only 1.68 and a population growth of 0.7, lower than the Netherlands. It is pretty clear that Iran has witnessed a cultural shift from traditional pro-fertility norms to individual choice norms, corroborating analyses that confirm a relation with secularization. The expected acceleration in religious decline, however, is not shown by surveys conducted by face-to-face and telephone interviewing. So how do we know secularization is happening? The qualitative literature is vast, so I can only give here a few examples. Let me go to the next slide. Secularization is shown by external evidence such as reports of emptying mosques, according to a senior cleric, even to the point that 50,000 mosques of approximately 75,000 have closed down. Though we have no way to verify this claim, Gamon's results do not contradict it. The change is also observed by the open lamentations of the clerical establishment regarding young people's willingness to receive seminary training, which they observe is declining, while protests such as turban tossing are popular and images disrespecting the religious and political authorities proliferate. The change can also be seen in a significant decline in Muslim baby names. In 2000, around 6.2% of boy names were Muhammad, consistently going down until it reached 2.7% in 2017. In the same period, the important Shia name Ali went down from 7.9% to 2.5%, and the girl name Fatimeh went down from 13.8% to 5.1%. Aggregating Muslim names shows a consistent decline. Now, after 2017, the Islamic Republic's National Organization for Civil Registration stopped publishing the numbers online. The clerical establishment and regime officials often express their worry about these developments. One cleric went so far as claiming that COVID-19 was, quote, a secular virus trying to lead religious countries astray and toward atheism, end quote. Iran's interior minister said in 2022, this will be extremely alarming if we find out that as a result of the incompetency of the government, people feel that the religious government is incapable of solving the country's problems and that a secular government can be effective, end quote. So our first goal at Gamon was to do surveys that can make sense of these realities. As Ammar explained, our rationale is that anonymous online non-probability surveys, when properly designed and disseminated by trusted sources, can alleviate the fear of the state and reduce measurement errors. Of course, such surveys inevitably suffer from sampling bias, since individuals inclined to express critical views of the regime are more likely to participate. But researchers can't do nothing. You cannot do anything if the respondents are not telling you the truth. You cannot, try to balance that out. So we reason that it's at least possible to balance a non-probability sample. We also relied, and this should be also stressed, that in Iran, there's an unusual way in which people have learned to mass share links online. It's a cultural phenomenon on its own, and on communication apps also like WhatsApp and Telegram to circumvent censorship and express themselves. So in June 2020, so the same year that the World Value Survey did this research, our survey on religion gained widespread attention, enabling the sampling of approximately 40,000 respondents in Iran within 2 weeks. The sample included people of diverse demographic backgrounds, such as women without higher education, lower income groups, people in rural areas, minorities, and regime supporters. Poster advertisements designed for diverse groups circulated and drew samples from different directions. So here, for example, are 3 posters we made for sharing on Instagram. On the left is a non-political page in Persian for kind of silly jokes. In the middle is anti-regime activist Masih Alinejad's page, who shared it. And on the right is a conservative fan page of Khamenei, which shared the link to our survey. Such pages had tens of thousands to several million followers. So there were much more, right? These are some examples. After waiting, using 5 demographic variables and 1 political variable, who people voted for in the 2017 elections, the results indicated that a majority of literate adults opposed the mandatory hijab. As expected, variations were observed based on, educational attainment, age, sex, urban and rural residency, but with differences up to 10%, far less than what stereotypes might suggest, that, all the people without higher education are pro-regime, or old people are all pro-regime, or men are all pro-regime. All these kind of stereotypes are not confirmed to that extent by these results. So 2 years later, a young Kurdish woman named Jina Amini, better known as Mahsa Amini, was beaten to death by the so-called morality police for not perfectly adhering to the compulsory hijab. Iranian women took to the streets, discarded, even burned their hijabs, chanting Zan Zindagi Azadi, woman life freedom. Around 500 people were killed, thousands arrested, and some, like the young man on the right, were convicted for waging war against God. This is Majid Reza Rahnavard. In a state broadcasted video, masked executioners asked for his final wishes. He said, "I don't want anyone to cry at my grave, to recite from the Quran, or to pray. Let them be joyful. Let them play joyous songs." Such defiant responses are popular. They indicate that the post-revolutionary generations do not want to be what the theocratic state wants them to be. So, for us, that means that getting religious identification right is crucial, as under the patriarchal, theocratic, and authoritarian political system, an existential reaction has been observed from the society. By now, the regime had blocked all social media and communication apps, which led to massive usage of VPN tools. So in the midst of the protests, we collaborated with VPN provider Siphon, but also another one called Lantern in 2022 and 23, enabling wider survey distribution and in a randomized way, semi-randomized, that does not rely on our own networks. So the December 22 survey on the nationwide protests yielded a sample size of over 158,000 respondents in Iran. After waiting, we found that around 80% opposed the very notion of an Islamic Republic. It's a result that completely contradicts those of the World Value Survey. Gamon's results show that Iranians are divided about their political preferences, as in terms of religious and non-religious identification. Also, they are divided, as any diverse society would be. But the majority does not want an Islamic Republic. And protesters have risked their lives to tell the world, chanting unambiguously, "We don't want an Islamic Republic. Jomhuri Islami nemikhaim." Those who argue that in theory, these protesters could constitute a small portion of the population, can only do so if they ignore decades of scholarship on cultural and religious changes in Iran. Qualitative researchers such as Bayat, Khosrow Khavar, and Tohidi describe bottom-up cultural shifts and transformations in subjectivity, interpreting the protests as an existential moment, a revolt not only against the regime, but against imposed religious meaning and bodily discipline prescribed by, the Islamic Republic. From this subjective refusal, that you are something else, you refuse to be what the regime wants you to be, follows the demand, the political demand for separating religion from government. So Gamon's results on religious identification confirm the interpretations of these qualitative researchers. The July 23 survey relied the most on VPN sampling through Siphon and Lantern. We gathered samples from over 38,000 literate individuals aged 20 and above residing in Iran. And the effective sample size was large, around 8,000, one of several indications that using VPN helped to improve the data quality in comparison with our past surveys. So what do Iranians then identify if not everybody thinks of themselves as Muslims? Our aim was to show researchers and the public that another Iran exists that is invisible in the World Values Survey results. The point of comparing these two diagrams isn't to say that you should take our results at face value or that different sorts of bias should not be accounted for. The point is, it's an entirely different image. Sampling using VPN tools and social media reveals identifications that don't even exist when conducting telephone and face-to-face surveys. We now see there are Jews, Baha'i, non-religious people, atheists, spirituals, self-professed Zoroastrians who yearn for the imperial glory of ancient Persia, and so on. These results require careful interpretation. The main giveaway is that Iranian society is indeed secularizing, as millions are turning away from the traditional majority religion and openly criticize religious authorities. This secularization does not lead to the disappearance of Islam, but to a more diverse society. Now, in our publications, we described some of the benchmark tests that Ammar also mentioned for assessing representativeness. And, the main giveaway is, although sampling bias and by the way, other forms of bias may remain an issue, we can say confidently that the weighted samples represent people from all social classes, ethnicities, ages, provinces, and of diverse political orientations, including regime proponents. So in sum, the evidence for measurement error is there. The question is our approach an alternative? Now, a Puritan defender of probability surveys will not be convinced. Will question if we really got enough regime proponents. In our publications, we engage with such questions, looking for clues to assess our results. We do our best. The main point, which I hope everybody can agree on, is that measurement error should be taken seriously when surveying religiosity in a brutal theocracy. And it should change how we do research, write about, and communicate numbers about societies under authoritarian regimes. So that was my presentation. Thank you for listening. And we have some time now, I think, for Q&A.
Thank you so much. So the questions are coming in through the Q&A function in the platform. I can read the first one, and then everyone else, please, you can submit through the Q&A function. So many thanks for your insightful presentation. The question is about VPN sampling. Isn't it highly sensitive method of data collection and how long it's going to run? As in some authoritarian states, using VPN is either prohibited or not welcomed. Governments are banning VPNs, making them stop working with techs, requiring stores to remove VPN apps for their countries.
If I want to say something about that, that's true. As I said, that it's not maybe easy to do VPN sampling in all contexts. The Iranian context, I think, is very special, but I think that it's not something that, for instance, we cannot imagine that to do such a kind of research in other countries that have some known VPN platforms that widely used. For instance, we know that in Russia also Siphon is widely used in China, in other countries, and also it can be also the kind of different VPNs. Yeah, we heard, for instance, from a colleague in Russia that they mentioned that the kind of filtering in Russia is much stronger than Iran. For instance, they can also block VPNs more effectively than Iranian case. So that's true. But in Iran, I don't know, fortunately, or maybe also because of we know that there is a kind of also busyness on selling some VPNs by some of the, in fact, Iranians officials, that IRGC, it's kind of military units in Iran, they are also behind the kind of selling VPN. In that way, you see that the VPNs is something used a lot in Iran. And specifically for us, the case of Siphon, because we did some research before doing our survey, that to what extent Siphon used by different groups of people. And that was amazing to understand that even supporters of regime, they use Siphon and largely, and so because they also wants to connect to YouTube, for them also everything is filtered. And so having or finding VPN platforms that are widely used, and you can be sure at least that you can reach different groups of society with that VPN is essential. And that's why we think that we should not stop in one and not thinking about another one. That's why we think maybe combination of VPN, social media. In some authoritarian context, for instance, Instagram is open and you can advertise for Instagram pages, but in Iran it's not possible. So any way that you can find a kind of anonymous way of reaching people then should be used. VPN is used in Iran because of some maybe specific qualities.
Okay, the next question we have is have you seen any efforts by malign political or economic actors to intentionally influence these data collection methods? And if so, have they been successful?
I can say something about that. Ammar maybe also wants to say something about that. I can give you one recent example of how these are used. Some researchers based at the University of Munich, so in Germany, also collaborated with our research and proudly in their report say that, our research is the one that did the survey for world value surveys, so it's good. And we did a research on life satisfaction in Iran after the woman life freedom protests. And it looks like a normal survey, but then the question is, did the violent protests, and this is how it's framed, did the violent protests reduce life satisfaction in Iran? And the answer is yes. People who are close to protests, they feel more miserable, and people who are more religious, they feel good. And look, these are the results. And the researchers at the end actually recommend persecuting protesters who are too violent. They literally use the word persecuting. So this is a 2023, I believe, publication. And there are many such examples. So, this is maybe an outlier in the sense that it's so openly calling for the persecution of protesters. But yeah, it's I think an example that shows how dangerous these numbers can be to people, and that this really for universities and research centers in Europe and North America is really a question. I think that it's also an ethical question about what does it mean to go to Iran and knock on somebody's door and ask them sensitive questions, like what kind of position are you putting these people into, and then how are you using these numbers? It's really problematic. On the other hand, we also rely on these surveys for benchmark tests. So it's not that we completely ignore these surveys. We compare sensitive and non-sensitive questions because the working assumption is that they really do the survey. So if these are probability surveys, then at least for the non-sensitive questions, we should and have found a match. So it opens up, I think, many ethical and political questions.
Well, we have many questions and just a few minutes left to the top of the hour. The next one is saying, that was great, thank you. How about a little more triangulation with other samples? For example, smaller samples with interviewers who are trusted by the different target elements in the society, and then also critical feedback on results. And I'm just scanning to see if there are other ones that are similar.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Well, just about the triangulation. So I've just started a mixed methods project funded by the Dutch Research Council, which will involve qualitative researchers who do interviews. And then, Ammar, you also maybe want to answer the second part of the question.
Yeah, I think that this is something that we try to use for non-sensitive questions. We try to replicate exactly the phrase that's used for non-sensitive questions by other survey institute, for instance, from Gallup, from World Value Survey, or from even Iran poll, even some ISPA. ISPA is the government-driven survey company in Iran, and we try to see that to what extent there are similarity or differences when we replicate the non-sensitive questions. So this is also the way that we try to do, but we have also the plan to somehow do concurrent surveys with the kind of our anonymity method, and also with the kind of not face to face, but phone surveys for some specific questions, and to see the differences, including both non-sensitive and sensitive questions. So we try to do this kind of triangulation in our method, and we tried it before, and also we have some more surveys to do in future to examine that.
That's great. So maybe this is our last question. We have two questions actually about multiple entries. Saying, thank you for the valuable insight. I wonder how you manage the possibility of duplicate entries by the same people. Do you treat them as negligible considering the sample size?
Yeah, this is, I think, a good question, also connected maybe to the first question, if I'm right, that maybe others try to pollute or manipulate, or that even hack. We had also some things like that. We, in the religion survey, we remember that because we consider some measures, some indicators that we can recognize. For instance, is there any kind of hack by the regime, or is there any kind of that just entering by bots or some things? We could recognize, and we could recognize one of them when we did 2020 religion survey, and we could have stopped that, and we could remove those data produced by bots or hackers. So we try to put a lot of different methods, also in consistency of questions, the kind of all things that can be done to recognize those not real opinions. But on the other hand, if we and also the kind of IP address, normally the platform survey doesn't let a kind of with the one IP address you participate twice. But yes, those who are very good in technical things, they can maybe participate 2 or 3 times. But the main issue is that when you use weighting as those who knows the issue of weighting, and then you have a very large sample size, you want to extract a kind of representative sample. It doesn't matter that if you have the same answer by 5%, repeating all the answers again, you know. If it wants to be very systematic, then it's something that we should do. And fortunately nowadays, with also using AI, we can also employ AI tools to do that. But on the other hand, we know also more challenges in future, because maybe AI can produce, you know, that responses. There is always challenges, and we try to see that how we can solve these issues. But yes, there are things there, and we try to take care of those things.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. Pooyan, do you have any last words to say?
Well, thank you very much for having us. I hope it helps.
Oh, and I think there's a lot of queries, and I think you'll probably be getting a lot of people following up, asking you questions. It has been, I've learned so much in this last hour. It's so impressive to be able to execute in this way, and the findings, and it's so convincing to me and many, clearly from the questions, that this work is so essential. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And we will coordinate with you to pass on the additional questions too. Thank you everyone for joining us live. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.